Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Savan Qadir. We're going to start with Ukraine update, day 208 of a Russian illegal invasion. And then we'll be introducing our guest. We're starting off with the Ukrainian military said on Sunday that its force repelled attacks by Russian troops in the Kharkiv region in the east and Kherson in the south, where Ukrainian launched counteroffensives this month, as well as in parts of Donetsk in the southeast. It says Ukrainian troops had advanced to the eastern bank of Oskil River in Kharkiv region. 5 civilians were killed in Russian attack in the eastern Donetsk region over the past day, while in Nikopol further west, several dozen residential buildings, gas pipelines and power lines were hit, regional governors said on Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed there will be no let-up in fighting to regain territory lost to Russia. Perhaps it seems to some of you that after a series of victories, we now have a lull of sorts, he said in his nightly address on Sunday. But there will be no lull. There is preparation for the next series. For Ukraine must be free, all of it. An intelligence update. The UK Ministry of Defense said Russian strikes on civilian infrastructure, including a power grid and a dam, had intensified. Ukrainian forces are refusing to discard worn-out US-provided arms, with many reserve engineering spare parts to continue their counter-offensives against Russian invasion. They are not willing to scrap it, one soldier said, recalling artillery with sharpened damage and sometimes completely worn out from firing round after round against Russian troops. The Ukrainian military has carried out 20 airstrikes in the past 24 hours against Russian strongholds, according to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The Russian singer Alla Pugacheva has spoken out against the war in Ukraine, the death of our boys for illusory goals. The remarks are the first time that the pop star, an icon in Russia, has publicly criticized the conflict. And we're going to go to talk, and I would like to introduce our guest, amazing campaigner William Duguid. Hi, William. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to the show, Savan.
Thank you. That's my first time, and I'm enjoying it so far. I just want to ask you a question. And what do you think about Ukrainian advance? How optimistic Vladimir? How optimistic the statement of Ukrainian Prime Minister was?
Well, it's a fairly optimistic statement, and of course, the Ukraine war is slightly difficult because we do tend to hear the output mainly of one side, and I think a lot of us are fairly partial in how we want the war to be going. But in realistic terms, it will be a back and forth thing, and there will be territory regained and possibly territory won by the other side. And at this stage, I don't see what the end of this war will look like and what the circumstances are that will bring about peace. So I take everything with a slight pinch of salt. I am glad that Ukraine hasn't collapsed, and I'm glad that gives hope to the Ukrainian refugees who are all over the world, including here in Scotland and here in Perthshire. But I think it's just a watching brief for all of us, and we have to put up with the consequence, well, really, as long as it lasts.
That's true. And one interesting point that the Russian singer came out and spoken out for the first time. And do you think, like, the longer the war it takes, and the more people in Russia and public figures and those are in favor of peace will come out and speak out and ask Putin to stop the invasion?
I think we are seeing a bit more of that. But what we don't know is what the internal power struggles, such as they may be, are within Russia. How secure is Putin's position? I'm rather wondering if people who aren't speaking out aren't taking a huge risk right now. And I'm aware of a number of particularly oligarchs who might be seen as competing for Putin's position up to, but are mysteriously disappearing in various ways. So I think there might be some sort of thing going on in Russia in terms of a power struggle. And I don't know where the comments of maybe even just celebrities fits into that, and what risks they're putting themselves in.
Thank you. But we're go on Queen's funeral. We're going to update you about that. The state of funeral of the Queen's concluded on official period of 10 days of national mourning. After laying in state in Westminster Hall, the Queen's coffin was transferred to Westminster Abbey on the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy. The procession was led by representatives of the armed forces, including the mass pipes and drums of Scottish and Irish regiments. Public figures in Scotland, including First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, were in attendance at Westminster's Abbey for the funerals. The service was be shown at cinemas in places including Edinburgh, Bowness and Peterhead, and it will be broadcast on a big screen in Holyrood Park in front of the Palace of Holyrood House. Although numbers in attendance were reported to be quite low, with one of the popular Scottish newspapers saying that people stayed at home to show their respect. First Minister said the state funeral for Her Majesty will be one of the most momentous occasions in recent history, with people from around the world watching and paying their respects. She was the great consonant, and it is an honour to represent Scotland at the service. I suppose, William, what do you take on the death of the Queen, and what does that mean for Scotland and Scottish people?
That remains to be seen. The death of the Queen is a highly significant event, both nationally and internationally. There's no doubt about that. And it will have repercussions. Simply, any long reign or any person in charge of anything for a long time is exceptionally hard to replace. And so the monarchy has the succession problem big style. I think that Prince Charles has made, I say Prince Charles, and this is part of the problem, one keeps forgetting, King Charles, I'm sorry, has made a somewhat uneasy start, but one can maybe forgive him in that, after all, he's going through this somewhat artificial amalgam of, on the one hand, grieving as a family member, and we all know what that is like, and how it's quite difficult to concentrate on other things that may seem irrelevant. He's mixing that in with doing this tour of becoming king and being seen to be king in so many places throughout the UK. And I think it's quite possible to see the strain telling on him, and I can quite understand why the royal family would want to have their own period of mourning going on for, I think it's a further 7 days. So in terms of the ongoing effect, it really depends on how the new situation is accepted by people and how they react and how they view it in the whole continuum of the year's history. Perhaps they feel it's a significant event in itself that the Queen has died. If that's then followed by their life actually becoming slightly harder, as it may well do with the economic circumstances we'll be in, it'll be impossible to separate the two in their thoughts. And I think that might in itself mean that they see it as the end of an era and be uncertain about what the future is. And of course, yes, that has an impact on Scotland, although I would stress that the monarchy and the question of the monarchy it should be entirely separate from the question of Scotland's constitutional position. On day one of an independent Scotland, we will still have the monarchy, and it'll be for the people of Scotland to decide, or indeed for the parliamentarians that they vote in, for them to decide whether Scotland retains the monarchy, reforms the monarchy, or ends the monarchy. And so, I don't know, is the answer.
Well, that was a really strong answer. Absolutely, it's going to be up to Scottish people what they want to do in the future. But I suppose I was going to ask you a question about a newspaper saying people staying at home in a way of showing respect. What do you take up on that? Do you think people in Scotland stayed at home to pay respect, or what was why the people it was low number of people outside and participating in watching the funeral.
Well, yes. Well, we don't know outside of London what was going on in England in terms of big screens and things like that. The Herald has no idea why people stayed home. They're making, I think, a political point, and what they're saying is we're going to frame the events that we saw. We're going to frame the events that we saw. It may be in the Herald, it may be in the Record. I think it was Tom Gordon tweeted about it. That's all I will say. They're going to frame it to suit their line of argument. And their line of argument right now is that the reaction to the Queen's death, and particularly when we were going through, when she was going through Scotland, is basically reinforcing the idea of the Union. It's brought that into people's minds again, and that's made them more accepting of the Union. I don't believe that's true. I believe a lot of independent supporters supported the Queen personally because they probably admired her, having grown up with her effectively. The people who lived through the war will remember her service during the war and have seen the crown perhaps thrust on her rather earlier than they might have expected, and I think they will have had a great deal of sympathy for her. So there is that. I don't think support for the monarchy in general is necessarily affected by that, and I also don't think it's as strong in Scotland, but it still is pretty strong, and it has to be taken account of. But as I said before, as far as the constitutional position is concerned, it's irrelevant. But as to what the newspapers' reports were saying about what people were doing and why, they haven't got the faintest idea. They didn't go and knock on their door and ask them why they were at home.
Absolutely, you cannot read people's intention. Well, we're going to move on to another topic. Institute for Fiscal Studies say Chancellor's tax cut likely to give lowest paid just 63p a month. Analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, has found the lowest paid workers stand to gain just 63p a month, while the richest could get back £150 a month from the tax cut, which are likely to be outlined by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng this week. The IFS data suggests the full reversal of the rise in national insurance is likely to benefit those who earn more than £100,000 most and will barely help the poorest 3 million households. Those in households with an average UK household income of £31,000 and £400 per year will save about £20 a month, while households with an income of £55,000 will save about £58 a month, according to our IFS analysis. Mr. Kwarteng is expected to announce a reversal of 1.25 cent point rise in national insurance and the mini budget on Friday, and could unveil further tax cuts such as a future reduction in income tax by 1p or even 2p. He's expected to present his plans without any independent analysis of how this will affect the national finances or how it will be paid for. So William, I was going to ask about, we all remember it was quite recent, Liz Truss campaign. The big headline was about the tax cut, and this has panned out to be only 63p per month for the poorest and £150 for the richest. And do you think it is what the people expected? It's the tax cuts people wanted and needed, and do you think that will help any household at all in this cost of living crisis?
I don't think anybody seriously believes that the sole answer to the cost of living crisis is tax cuts. I think also that tax cuts always tend to favour the richer, simply because the richer pay more tax. But there are other things they could be doing with tax. They've got the threshold for taxation frozen until 2025. They could raise that, which would take a lot more people out of tax and maybe make their work more valuable to them. That's one thing they could do. So I think there needs to be a lot more meat on the bone of what they do with the cost of living crisis, because that's going to be falling on people very soon, and it's going to be falling on people with very little parliamentary discussion. There's only this week's lead up to what seems to be a mini budget, which will have to be a bit of a maxi budget, and then we're into party conference territory. So that's not particularly satisfactory. Um, uh, so I did kind of expect it, to be fair with you. The other thing I would say, by the way, it's said that what's likely to emerge is a reversal of the national insurance increase that was previously announced by Rishi Sunak. And my slight problem with that is that that was supposedly destined to help the NHS, which of course was in big trouble following the COVID outbreak and just falling behind. If that's not happening, how is the NHS going to be helped, and where's the money for that going to come from? Overall, I think it's rather fast put together. And yes, no independent analysis is not a good idea. Also, probably sacking Tom Scholar, who was the man at the Treasury who advised chancellors for many years, not always a man, I guess, whose decisions I might have agreed with, because I suspect he might have had a lot to do with austerity in the 2010s. But nevertheless, an authoritative voice that says to you, Minister, do you understand the consequences of what you're doing? For him to be gone, and for there to be no independent analysis of the tax cuts, and for it to be rushed through because of the parliamentary timetable, because of circumstances, whatever, not a healthy position. And I'm not looking forward to the fallout.
Right, and also my question would be around the windfall tax. So many people are asking for windfall tax to help with the cost of living crisis. And what do you think, why the Tories are, the Conservative Party are reluctant to impose windfall tax, whereas the EU just start taking the statement coming out from the EU saying they have to pay from the excessive profit they make. Do you think UK should follow the path?
I think the windfall tax might be justified. Yes, obviously there's the windfall tax that's already been announced, but to increase that, because a windfall is a windfall. It's not money you thought you were going to have and be doing things with. But the Conservatives are temperamentally not in favour of things like windfall taxes that affect big business. Too many of them, I suspect, have links with big business, either past or present. So I think that's the main reason for them not doing it. I don't necessarily think a windfall tax is the best thing, because you have to keep doing it if prices stay high. I would much rather see a fundamental reform of electricity costs based on the mode of production, and not nailing the cost of energy to the most expensive component, which happens to be extremely expensive right now. I think a fundamental reform to the whole thing, which I suspect we will get because there will be international pressure for it. I think that's the best answer.
Thank you. And then the long run, obviously, green plan is what we need to focus on, and unfortunately, what we're seeing just now, it coming to the end of the priority list. We'll move on to another topic, which is the number 10 chief of staff spoken to by FBI about work for banker accused of bribery. Mark Fulbrook, the new Downing Street chief of staff, has been interviewed by the FBI as a witness about work he did for a banker accused of bribery. It emerged on Sunday. Mr. Fulbrook was working as a political consultant when he provided research in 2020 for Giulio Herrera Valentini, a Venezuelan-Italian banker accused of bribing the governor of Puerto Rico around the same time. A senior organizer in Conservative Party politics for decades, who was appointed chief of staff at number 10 after running Liz Truss campaign for the Tory leadership, Fulbrook has said that he did not break the law, and that he was not aware that his client may have had corrupt motive for hiring him as a consultant. According to the US, Indeciment Herrera Valentini offered to contribute to Wanda Vasquez Garcia's, sorry for my pronunciation, campaign for a re-election as a governor of Puerto Rico in return for Vasquez Garcia sacking the island's financial regulator, who was investigating Herrera Valentini's bank. It's alleged that Herrera Valentini offered support worth £300,000. The launch of proceedings in the US provoked controversy in the UK because Britannia Financial Services, a company set up and largely owned by Herrera Valentini, has given more than £500,000 to the Conservative Party since 2019. Labour said that in the light of the allegation against the banker, the Tories should give the money back. Fulbrook is involved because at the time he was working for City as a political consultancy founded by Sir Linton Crosby, who has run a general election campaign for several Tory leaders. Herrera Valentini was paying City for consultancy service that might have helped Garcet in her re-election bid. According to a report in the Sunday Times, Fulbrook was the lead consultant on the project and flew to Puerto Rico in February 2020. 6 months ahead of the election, the firm produced opinion research relevant to the campaign. So this is quite extraordinary story, William. What do you think of Labour comments saying, in the light of allegation against the bank, the Tories should give the money back, the £500,000 they got?
Yes, I mean, in a sense, that's a bigger story than the Fulbrook story. Fulbrook, at this point, is just a witness. He's not in any way a suspect. That may change, but there's no particular reason to believe that it will. But certainly, Britannia Financial Services is, according to the report, a company set up and largely owned by Herrera Valentini, and it gave more than £500,000 to the Tory party over the last 3 years. And this is part of a seam that runs through political party funding at the moment, which is effectively potentially dirty money. And I think the onus on the political parties, if the system is to remain beyond reproach, or even close to beyond reproach, is that they should be seen to do right, and certainly anything that's a bit dodgy they should give back.
I think, do you think it's the time to change regulation about donors and how party get donation, and it should be a clearer procedure, like vetting procedure, who you get a donation and from? Because there's been a lot of problem in the past, so sorry.
Yes, it's not the first time there's been an issue with party funding. There should be a root and branch review of party funding. We don't want the parties to run out of money, but we don't, at the same time, want people to have influence on them who are not thinking for the best motives. I think there should be limits on individual funding. There are currently limits, but there should be certainly more stringent limits, and little arrangements that get round the existing procedures. We should be recasting the arrangements to avoid those from happening. So yeah, let's reform.
And as we've spoken about illegal Russian invasion, it's been reported that lots of Russian money went to UK political parties in the past decades, large amount, which obviously they had influence on political campaigns and political landscape in the UK. And I think you're absolutely right. We should have a better way of dealing with donors. And I totally agree. But we're going to move on to a story which is very close to my heart. The story. Home Office refuses to speed up visa case for women with terminal cancer. A great grandmother and a Windrush campaigner who has terminal cancer has begged the Home Office to resolve her immigration status before she dies, but it has refused to expedite her case. Iwale Pennant, 64 years old, of Jamaican heritage, arrived in the UK in 2001 and was granted a student visa. At one point, her immigration case was stuck in a Home Office backlog for a decade. She was granted a discretionary leave to remain in 2019 on the basis of family life with her partner, Guilford Fraser, a British citizen and Windrush descendant, who arrived in the UK from Jamaica in 1968 at the age of 12. Ms. Pennant's leave to remain ran out in January this year. She has made a new application for further leave to remain, but is still waiting for the Home Office to process it. In the letter dated of 6th of August, Home Office officials said the type of application Ms. Pennant made does not have a target response, and although these applications are considered as quickly as possible, there may be circumstances which result in extended delay in the application processing time. She was working as a carer during the pandemic and was a music performer with a stage named Lady P Lioness, but was diagnosed with a stage 4 small round cell sarcoma in April and has been given just a month to live by her doctors. Ms. Pennon has no recourse to public fund, so she cannot access benefit that could make her life final months more comfortable. So far she has not been charged for NHS treatment, but she fears that Fraser may be saddled with a huge bill after her death. She has received emails from the hospital's overseas visitors department asking for proof of her leave to remain in the UK. The couple live in a third floor flat in Hackney with no lift. Pennant is housebound, apart from when an ambulance crew carry her down the stairs for hospital appointments. Ms. Pennant said, "If the Home Office would sort my case out, my life would be a million times better than it is now. They've messed with my life for so many years. The treatment is cruel. It is hostile. It is racism. I've had a lot of struggle in my life. I don't know what I have done to deserve this." And I think, William, the hostile environment and it's been there for many years. And a story like this is really touching everyone's heart, I'm sure. And the delay in the Home Office, I think, just an excuse because the austerity and cutting staff and the bureaucracy in the Home Office procedure. And what do you take on the story overall?
It's a classic example of how individuals fall through the cracks. Because, this lady has been fighting for maybe 20 years, one way or the other. Okay, maybe not fighting all the time, but you'd have thought that 20 years in the country, contributing to the country would gain her something, but that's not what the hostile environment says. And of course, yes, it has been around, not just the newly installed Home Secretary, or her predecessor, but it was Theresa May who trumpeted the hostile environment as something that was supposedly for the good. It's nothing of the sort. It is nothing more than cruelty. It's very often tinged by racism. And it's not an effective way of doing things. And an effective immigration system must also be a humane one, and it must be a timely one. The fact that they're unable to process things quickly should, by default, mean that people have more leeway rather than less leeway, rather than their time running out and they just get thrown out of the place. No recourse to public funds is incredibly cruel because it means that people who really require benefits in order to keep going, basically, are denied them. And then, of course, there is the outside possibility of the NHS ultimately charging for the treatment. I don't think if she were to pass away, it would necessarily fall on her partner, but I understand her worry. And that must be something that nags at her the whole time, with the feeling that she can do nothing about it. So it's difficult to see things improving under the present regime and with the present personnel. But honestly, the cracks are considerable, and it's hardly surprising that people are falling through them.
And with the fact the Home Office saying there are circumstances that it may take longer, I feel like, I don't know, what do you think, but I feel like this is exactly the circumstances that it shouldn't take longer time because she has months to leave. I mean, that's not a reasonable excuse to delay. That's an exactly reasonable excuse to make it fast and speed up and give it priority. And the fact, that people.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, it couldn't be more crueler than that, and it literally touched my heart because I'm someone who been through the system, and I felt for it, and I wish her all the best. Don't know what best mean in that context, but we're moving on to a different topic, which is the UK monarchy set for windfall from wind farm. The royal family stands to benefit from a huge windfall from the boom in offshore energy, potentially sparking a debate about funding the monarchy. The Treasury has confirmed that an official review of the sovereign grant, which stands at 86.3 million a year, is ongoing and is expected to come into effect from April next year. Officials says they want to ensure the funding is appropriate levels. The Crown Estate owns virtually all of the seabed around the UK to a distance of 12 nautical miles. The value of this marine portfolio is now worth 5 billion, driven largely by demand for seabed leases for wind farms. The management of the Crown's estates in Scotland and Northern Ireland is devolved. Public finance for the royal household is paid as a fixed proportion of profit of the Crown Estate, the organisation that manages the Crown's public lands in England and Wales, including coastal and marine assets. This profit are now expected to rise significantly because of the drive by energy companies to harness wind power. The former Chancellor George Osborne announced a reform of public funding of the monarchy in 2011, replacing the civil list with a sovereign grant. The first such grant in 2012 and 2013 was 31 million to pay staff costs, official travel and royal household expenses. But the core grant for these costs had increased to 51.8 million by 2021-2022, with additional 34.5 million for the works at Buckingham Palace. King Charles is expected to review the vast property portfolio of the royal family. The royal household website lists 22 residences, including Buckingham Palace, St James Palace, Kensington Palace, and Windsor Castle. Sandringham and Balmoral in Scotland are privately owned. Charles and the Queen Consort have a mansion at Berkhow on the Balmoral estate. He also has a house in Carmarthenshire in Wales, which is adjoining cottage for rent. The King is also reported to have purchased a 5-bedroom home in Romania in 2006 as an isolated holiday retreat. The Crown Estate also listed the Royal Lodge at Windsor Prince Andrew and nearby Bagshot Park to Prince Edward. Prince Anne lives at Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire, which is privately owned. And William, what do you think? How the arrangement is in Scotland about Crown Estate and wind farm?
Well, I think I don't know for sure is the answer, but I believe that if it is devolved, which it is, then the Scottish Government might be able to do something about the windfall. Whether they have the will to do it is another matter. But there is a wider question about the whole financing of the monarchy because, there's it's not just the Crown Estate question. It's the fact that there's an exemption from corporation tax. There's an exemption from inheritance tax, and the money rolls in. And what do we get for the money? And that will be a debate that people have more and more as their own personal circumstances get squeezed. It will seem increasingly like one law for the monarchy and one law for them. Now, there may well be justifications for all of those things, but I think they're going to have to be spelled out a lot more. And certainly, I would like to see the Scottish Government going to the limit of its current powers in order to see what can be done with regard to the windfall that there's undoubtedly taking place at the moment.
Thank you. We're going to move on to a story about global tax. Speaking of tax, vulnerable countries demand global tax to pay for loss and damage caused by climate change. The world's most vulnerable countries are preparing to take on the richest economies with a demand for urgent finance, potentially including new taxes on fossil fuels or flying for irrecoverable losses they are suffering from the climate crisis, leaked document shows. Extreme weather is already hitting many developing countries hard and forecast to wreak further catastrophe, loss and damage. The issue of how to help poor nations suffering from the most extreme impact of climate breakdown, which countries cannot be protected against, is one of the most contagious problems in climate negotiations. The Guardian is reporting that some of the world's most vulnerable countries have prepared a paper for discussion at the UN General Assembly this week. It shows that poor countries are preparing to ask a climate-related and justice-based global tax as the way of funding payments for loss and damage suffered by the developing world. The funds could be raised by global carbon tax, a tax on airline travel, a levy on the heavily polluting the carbon-intensified bunker fossils used by ships, adding tax to fossil fuel extraction, or a tax on financial transactions. All options for funding loss and damage are likely to be difficult for rich nations to agree to at a time of soaring fossil fuel costs, rising food prices, and a cost of living crisis around the world. Although rich countries agreed at the COP26 UN Climate Summit in Glasgow last year that there should be a framework for loss and damage, there's no agreement on how it could be funded or who should contribute. Nations will meet again for fresh talks called COP27 in Egypt this November, but loss and damage is again expected to be a major topic of discussion. So, William, I wanted to ask you about this idea, real idea. Like we see so many international meetings and congress and coming together, and the outcome for some people might say is little. Is nothing more than just coming together for a couple of days and covering some headlines. But in action-wise, nothing major has happened. Especially after the COP26, do you sense any optimism that coming out in COP27, since we haven't seen much on the COP26?
I think COP27 will be a lot more fractious, probably because of the international situation. We say nothing happened after COP26. What actually happened is we had a war in mainland Europe, which was possibly about the worst thing we could have done. And that, now countries are using that as an excuse to evade the responsibilities. Yes, they agreed a framework. Yes, they agreed a framework without any detail. And it was almost as if they wanted to go for the least they could possibly give in order to get out the room and claim they had done something. And now they say they're a bit strapped at the moment. Well, they are. Fix the problems, fix the underlying problems, and let's give the nations who are not responsible largely for this problem, this larger problem of climate change, let's give them the money they need just to get through sustainably. Because if you don't do that, the consequences could be absolutely dire. And, we're talking about areas of the planet becoming uninhabitable anyway. But things that can be fixed not being fixed because of lack of funds, because the rich countries won't live up to the responsibilities, is not acceptable. Development agencies have been going on about this for years, and it needs some action, some proper action, I think.
And I suppose millions of people now been affected by floods and already the climate change. I think it happens earlier than so many expected. And we still have some climate deniers at the level of the societal level, but also as a policymakers. What do you say to them? I want you as an activist send a message out to those who are still denying climate, who are not seeing and foreseeing the damage it comes with. If we are going through the climate disaster, but if we go further with what we are doing already.
Well, what message can we send to climate deniers that they're going to listen to? Climate deniers are getting into power in places. I think you'll find that one or two of the new Tory cabinet are pretty close to being climate deniers if they aren't already. The ERG is not desperate to stop big business in its tracks or disadvantage big business or the people with the wealth generally just because we have to fix the planet. It's short-termism, I should say, run rampant. So I'm not sure I have a message because I think the message should be for people to stand up to the climate deniers and drive them out of the positions they're in, and maybe that'll get us somewhere.
Thank you. I think that was a clearest message you could ever send to a climate denier. And maybe we'll move on to President Biden's calls. Trump's handling of documents totally irresponsible. President Biden said in an interview on the CBS 60 Minutes program aired on Sunday that his predecessor, Donald Trump's handling of classified document was totally irresponsible, but that he is staying out of the investigation. Seeing the classified document turned up by an August 8 FBI search of Trump's Florida residence at Mar-a-Lago caused Mr. Biden to wonder how anyone can be that irresponsible, adding, I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? And by that, I mean names of people who help, and it is just totally irresponsible. The remarks broke with the President Biden's pattern of avoiding commenting on the Justice Department criminal probe ex-President Trump for possibly taking ultra-sensitive material to his residence after his terms ended in January 2021. President Biden said he had not received a classified briefing on the contents of those documents. The Justice Department has said it was investigating Trump for removing White House record because it believed he illegally held documents, including some involving intelligence gathering and clandestine human sources among America's most closely held secrets. President Biden's intelligence chief is also investigating whether the disclosure of information in those documents presented a national security risk. And President Biden again says U.S. forces would defend Taiwan from Chinese attack. President Biden has again said U.S. forces would defend Taiwan in the event of Chinese invasion in his most explicit statement so far on the issue. Asked in a CBS 60 Minutes interview broadcast on Sunday whether U.S. forces would defend the self-ruled island claimed by China, he replied, yes. In fact, there was an unprecedented attack. Asked to clarify if he meant that, unlike in Ukraine, U.S. forces, American men and women would defend Taiwan in the event of Chinese invasion. Mr. Biden said, yes. A White House spokesperson said U.S. policy toward Taiwan had not changed after being asked about the president's comment. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said China had lodged stern representation with the U.S. The U.S. remark severely violated the important commitment the U.S. made not to support Taiwan independence and send a seriously erroneous signal to Taiwanese separatist independence force. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mo Ning said at a regular press briefing. In a statement, Taiwan's Foreign Ministry expressed sincere gratitude to President Biden for affirming the U.S. government's rock-solid promise of security to Taiwan. Taiwan would resist authoritarian expansion and aggression and deepen the close security partnership with Washington and other governments with similar thinking to protect regional stability, the statement said. The U.S. president's remarks throw into a question Washington's long-standing position of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. The U.S. is obligated by federal law to ensure that Taiwan has the means to defend itself, but the law does not state whether American forces would be sent. The U.S. has no formal relations with the democratically run island, but maintain informal diplomatic ties. A White House spokesperson said after the 60 Minutes interview, the president said this before, including Tokyo earlier this year. He also made clear then that our Taiwan policy hasn't changed. That remains true. So I think that's two topics, but both similar. We cover an each. I mean, I'll start with the latter, with the Taiwan situation. How dangerous that statement is, or how supportive it is for Taiwanese and the separatists?
It's potentially dangerous. I mean, we're constantly walking a tightrope with the balance of power between, if you like, the three big powers: Russia, China, and US. I think it's probably fair to say that everything Joe Biden says and does at the moment is being done with the midterms coming up, the midterm elections, and you've got to see it in that light. And here he is now taking part in an interview, and he's getting asked questions and he's answering them. And the problem with a situation that involves strategic ambiguity, and you then get asked a yes/no question, which is what happened with Taiwan, is that you're probably likely to say one of these things, unless you've... I know politicians have the ability of not answering yes/no questions, but not all of them can always avoid them, perhaps. So, yeah, immediately he says it, then the officials come out, he's not changed the policy. Well, that cannot be true, but at the same time, It doesn't mean policy can't flee ambiguity itself. So I think it's going to be saber rattling, and I think it will probably settle down. But it just is an illustration of how difficult it is for politicians to maintain deliberately ambiguous positions.
And how sensitive the time is, because as we know, China and Russia are close, and in this moment of time, what we need uh, is to see Russia's backing off and actually more sanctions and less support for Russia. Do you think like comments like that or statement like that will push away China and put Russia and China closer together in the fight we are in against literally this is against Ukraine, but also all around the world and West. So, do you think that will have any impact on the relationship, strengthen the relationship between China and Russia because they both have skin in the game?
Well, you have some effect, but of course, the relationship between Russia and China is always in flux anyway, because I don't think China will be entirely happy with what Russia is doing in Ukraine. China's main interest is going to be advancing its own position within the world power structure. That is, it's always going to be what it is. And I think actually China isn't going to do anything necessarily that's that dangerous unless and until it's so without risk. So I don't think this in itself will change the position very much. I think what happens is the officials are the ones who talk to each other on all sides, and they just smooth the thing over. And we're sorry what the leader said here. It was, maybe he misspoke a wee bit. No, we're still strategically ambiguous. So just keep a close watch, but I think probably this will turn out to be a storm in a teacup. Watch me be wrong now.
I doubt. And one more thing about Donald Trump, the way he was handling secretive documents. How do you make of that? Such a president.
It was an incredibly foolhardy thing to do. He got. I should stay out of this a wee bit more, but he was probably asked a question, wasn't he? He says, "I'm staying out of this," and then he makes a comment to say it was irresponsible. There is the danger with Trump. He will either be the next president of the United States or he will be a martyr unless we're very, very careful. And I think that you've got to take into account in everything you do with them. And if I were Biden, I would stay well clear of the subject so you can demonstrate beyond doubt that this investigation was not politically motivated. I don't believe for a moment it was politically motivated, but tensions are running quite high in the US, and you need to be seen to be doing it that way.
I think, and the last question I will have about Donald Trump, which is a bit far from the topic, but do you sense that Donald Trump would come back in the next election, or this political statement, which we can say political statement from the current president, is to stop the resurrection of Donald Trump in the next election? Does he still see? Are we still seeing him as a risk for coming back?
The Democrats would like to stop Trump, but I suspect that the movement that Trump started is going to create its own future leaders, maybe who are a bit younger, and that's actually likely. I think Trump will find that ultimately there is an obstacle to his election. It seems to me that the Democrats are gaining a wee bit of ground as we move towards the midterms, possibly as a result of Roe v. Wade and other things, or maybe just the feeling that the events of the last year or so, or 18 months rather, have meant they've had to strengthen their news. So I think we should be looking at some of the other things going on with people like Ron DeSantis and the younger candidates who are also far, far right and not particularly healthy development for the Republicans. And that may be where the worry lies.
Thank you, William. We will go for our last, but not least, story of tonight. In Iran, dozens injured in protests over the death of Mahsa Amini while in custody, which also she knows by the name of Gina. More than 30 Iranians were injured, some seriously, while taken to the street to protest after the death of 22-year-old Kurdish woman 3 days after she was arrested and reportedly beaten by morality police in Tehran. The circumstances of Mahsa Amini's death on Friday are hotly contested, but her family denied official report that she suffered from epilepsy and insisted she was bitten by police. She had been visiting Tehran with her brother when she was picked by the police outside a metro station and put into a van for allegedly not complying with the country's hijab regulation. By the way, she had an hijab on, but it wasn't exactly the style that the morality police wanted. The controversy is now widening into a dispute not just about the enforcement of the hijab in cities, but the accountability of the morality police, as well as mistrust towards government denial of wrongdoing. The horrific death front page news in some Iranian newspapers makes for a difficult backdrop for President Ibrahim Raisi's visit to New York for the UN General Assembly. His visit was already facing protests from human rights campaigners and Republicans opposed to Joe Biden taking any step to reopen the Iran nuclear deal. Raisi has called for a report into Mahsa Amini's death. Demonstrators initially gathered outside the Kashra hospital in Tehran, where Mahsa Amini died after she collapsed in the detention center. Her body was then transported by plane to Sakis in her native province of Kurdistan in northwest of Iran for an emotional burial, which took place on Saturday. The police tried to keep the numbers attending the funeral to a minimum, but thousands were reported to have been at the gravesite. The protests then gathered outside the Sakis governor's office, where the violence occurred. Kurdish human rights groups reported that security forces deployed pepper spray against protesters, leading to more than 30 injuries. There were also peaceful protests on Sunday at the Faculty of Fine Arts at Tehran University, where a group of 100 students risked punishment and carried posters reading "Women like freedom." Words that they were also heard at the funeral. And well, we were just talking and just had a breaking news coming in, which was reported in K24, which stands for Kurdistan 24 news agency, reported that at least 4 people were killed and 10 injured after security forces shot at protesters in Iranian Kurdistan. The death of Mahsa, also known as Gina Amini, recently fueled a wide outrage both in Iranian Kurdistan and the rest of Iran. Obviously, a sad news, William. But what do you take on Iranian regime and on killing people, arresting people by morality police, and then themselves saying we will be launching an investigation, like themselves, the person who committed the crime, who are going to investigate the crime? How much you have trust in them?
It's difficult to have any sort of trust in it, particularly an authority investigating itself. Never a good look. The morality priests are a big problem. It's difficult to avoid the conclusion that what they're about is not protection of women, not protection of the tenets of Islam or anything, but intimidation of women. And that's certainly what's happened here. And as so often with this sort of thing, it's the attempts by the authorities to cover it up or to deny it or to sideline it that are just as inflammatory as the underlying cause. So you get, statements put out and then about what her condition might have been over time, something her family disputes, and it's just a recipe for this sort of persistent trouble coming up, and now to find out that it's escalating is just not good news at all.
I mean,
What's that to say?
it smells like a revolution in Iran, as it seems all the news covered. Like, there's so many people coming on the street and they burning their hijab and cutting their hair in solidarity to what happened. And I suppose, I mean, I don't know, but I feel like because that's a pattern of killing, especially targeting of Kurdish ethnicity in Iran. That's why people perhaps have no trust at all in authority and whatever they claim. And it's just unbelievable because there were multiple people beating her up before arresting and coming out saying it was heart attack or whatever it is, and it just caused more controversy than giving people an answer they were looking for. And I think, but what do you think about justice in Iran? Do you think uh, all justice is actually buried for a long time in Iran, and how long do you think it takes for this country used to be very beautiful to come back again and to be part of the real world?
Well, it has. Revolutions may always happen. If you're going to have a revolution work, though, and I'm not sure if we've reached that. This may escalate, or it may be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It may be the blue paper that lights something off. I don't know. I tend to doubt it at this point, but we'll see how things develop. Justice across the world is in a dire state because there are always powerful interests that are jockeying for positions. So it's difficult to be optimistic. I really wish I were. I wish I had a wee smiley on all the time. But I see this sort of thing happening in various corners of the world, and indeed something, maybe not as bad, but certainly along the same road happening not far away from where I am. And it's difficult not to feel a wee bit sick for the future of the human race.
Thank you. Well, that is for this evening. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can't afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programs for you. And nothing else but wish you a good night and thank you for watching. Thank you, Willie.